Well, it's time for Woke Watch. We're going to persist with that graphic. Don't care if you don't like it. Yesterday, we brought you the story of a sculpture in Stroud, Gloucestershire, which a local council has suggested is no longer appropriate, there's that word, in spite of claims that a majority of local people want it to be kept in place. Today, another monument, and this one of a figure deeply entwined with our island story. This sculpture is exercising council officials in Tavistock in Devon, where they've reviewed the future of a statue of Sir Francis Drake following those Black Lives Matter protests. The council decided the famous British mariner, venerated for generations as the hero of our victory over the Spanish Armada, should have an explanatory plaque placed alongside his image. The plaque highlights his, quote, horrific slave trading expeditions. One letter of support was written in support of the plaque, with 89 locals writing to object. Andrew Doyle is here to reflect on that scorecard. We did a story yesterday which had parallels to this. This one was in Stroud. It was the image, the statue of the black boy, 240 years old, striking the clock. And again, you had a group of activists who were saying, let's take it down. But actually, an unquantifiable number of local people saying don't touch it. Wow. What is the... And I found myself saying to Tom Slater, who, by the way, was an excellent stand-in while you were away.
I'm sure he was wonderful. Not as good as me,
what is the process? What is the mechanism?
Well, this is the point, isn't it, is that to what extent has the democratic process been fulfilled? Now, I think in this case, the council at Tavistock had performed some kind of consultation with the public, and as you say, 89 responses were in support of leaving the statue as it is, and one person supported the idea of the addition of the plaque, and they went with it anyway, which suggests there is a kind of predetermined decision here anyway, that the consultation meant absolutely nothing. And I think that is a failure on the part of the local government, isn't it? Because I think if you're going to have consultations, they ought to mean something. And I think that's what this is really about, or the problem with this particular scenario is. And the other issue with it, which I find very interesting, is the idea of adding a plaque, an explanatory plaque, to the statue is one thing, but these plaques are normally very small. You can normally only mention the things that the figures are mostly remembered for. In fact, the reason why the statue was erected in the first place in the late 19th century, and this is to at the time it was to commemorate the 300th anniversary of the Armada, but it's also to do with Francis Drake circumnavigating the globe, because that's what he's most famous for. You can't really add absolutely everything that he did during his life, good and bad. I mean, you'd have pages and pages and pages. Of course, his association with the slave trade dates from very early in his career, when he was in his 20s, and this is 3 voyages he did in the 1560s with John Hawkins, and he wasn't the main protagonist in these events. It seems like it's not a footnote, it's an important aspect of his life, but it's not the thing that people remember him for, and it would be it's the thing for the history books, but it's an odd thing to appear on this plaque.
Well, and because it's just one particular section of that Wikipedia entry, isn't it? We'll just flash up. I wonder if we can pull up the statue again. I want us to reflect on it, if we can pull it up, of Sir Francis Drake. And as you look at that, I mean, OK, every time I walk through Parliament Square, as I did last night, Andrew, in the centre of London by Parliament, I go by another man on a plinth, and it's Winston Churchill. And now, Drake in his own way was every bit as influential. Well, it was hugely influential.
Yes.
There's Churchill, hugely influential. And I carry on walking around Parliament Square, and then I see Oliver Cromwell, hugely influential.
Yes.
And there's one of Richard Coeur de Lion, hugely
there's
influential.
All sorts of people, yeah.
And then I think, well, Oliver Cromwell, the siege of Drogheda, slaughter of 3,000 Catholics. Richard Coeur de Lion, the slaughter of Muslims at, was it Acre or Haifa, Third Crusade. And let's not even get started on Winston Churchill and area bombing.
Bengal famine, for instance.
And all the rest, So if it's fine, let's just smother all the plinths of all the significant figures in British public life with explanatory notes.
Well, I mean, even Mahatma Gandhi is in that square, and you could argue some of the things that he said about
very
African
problematic.
People. Yeah. I mean, there have been calls for a statue of his in Manchester, I believe, to be taken down. So you can do this. You can problematise any historical figure.
Problematise.
Well, that's the word that the activists use mostly. They say this is problematic, so they are problematising these statues. And you take the Drake example. Well, the third voyage he was on, Queen Elizabeth I was a shareholder on that voyage, and it's in the voyage that was attempted to break into the West African slave trade. So do we now take... I mean, the oldest statue in London is, in fact, of Queen Elizabeth I. It's on Fleet Street. Do we now add panels to that to say how evil she was. And I think that's the other point, isn't it? That, you know, the plaque is using language that is specifically moralistic. Yeah. So the wording of the plaque in the Francis Drake case, it uses words like brutal, horrific, right? So it's using morally judgmental terms. Now, that's not something that historians generally like to do. I know there's some debate about that, but good historians refrain from moral judgment.
They let you make the judgment. Well, they don't start using adjectives which mean they've made their mind up already.
Well, they're not trained for that kind of thing anyway. Their job is to record facts and interpret history. But if they start adding moral judgments, because historians know better than anyone that ethical trends shift over time, and what happens if a historian is too moralistic, their work ages very badly. You know, if I think back, even in literary criticism terms, if I think back, I used to read C.S. Lewis's writings about Shakespeare, and they're really fun to read, but the weakest parts are when he gets moralistic about the characters. Like with Venus and Adonis, he starts sort of condemning Venus's behaviour because he doesn't consider it ladylike, and that stuff doesn't age very well. So historians generally do avoid the aspect of moral judgment. But when it comes to these plaques, it's clear to me that actually the council in this case are not consulting historians, or if they are, they're consulting a very sort of narrow range, and they have a preconceived idea of what it should say. And what it should say is a severe moral judgment which simplifies history, simplifies the biography of very complex historical figures in order to appease a handful of activists, and in this case just one person who wrote in.
40 seconds left. More than enough time to pass the complicated story of the Garrick Club in London, where Cherie Blair, wife of Tony Blair, has been hoping to become a member for some time. Problem is, to be a member of that club, you've got to be recommended by members who then decide whether you're fit and proper to join. You can go as a guest as a woman, you can't become a member. Is that, speaking of morality, is that moral?
Well, you know, I wouldn't want to join a club that was just men only, personally. But I think if there's a private club like the Freemasons or something like that, that has rules like that, they're a private club. I think I would feel differently if it was a body that was offering public services, so like a bed and breakfast that might turn away gay couples, for instance. I don't think that's right. But I think when it comes to private clubs with private memberships and their own rules, I think it's up to them. I would just go elsewhere, personally.
Yeah, take your trade elsewhere.
Yeah.
OK. Andrew, thanks very much. Nice to have you back.